was quite long, and I really appreciate your commitment. We will try today, since we don't have any meetings with developers, to be a bit more efficient and hopefully be able to respect your time and your evening. We will start with the roll call. Suzanne?
Present.
Patrick?
Present.
John?
Present.
We know Kimberly's not here yet. Mike?
Here.
Pranati?
Present.
Marilee?
Here.
And is Ted on the call?
That was going to be one of my announcements. So Ted has unfortunately resigned from the board, so he will be missed. So it's currently an 8-member board at this time.
Got it. Got it. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes from the last meeting? Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in the open discussion when we were talking about RCAs that it was noted that perhaps U-channel posts as well as painting trees might be options to ameliorate the concerns about attaching things to small trees and perhaps the visual litter issue.
Great. Marking that section, Megan, is that something you feel like you can update?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Does anyone else have any other comments to the minutes? Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Thanks, Marilee. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, John. I will vote aye. Suzanne?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
John should be aye. Mike?
Aye.
Pranati?
Aye.
Great. Passed. Megan, thanks. We got a preview of the announcements. We'll turn it over to you for the rest of them.
Great. Hey, everyone. I am going to, that was actually all of my announcements, and I'm happy to move on to committee updates unless there are any other announcements. All right. Well, have a couple.
Hold on, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
wanted to give you guys a quick update. We've had a few more of the rezoning submit. Thus far, they've submitted with all of the recommendations that you guys have provided us. Staff is working with them to turn those items on the list into conditions that we can enforce. So this month we had, looks like Evans Road Assembly, Holland Road Assembly, the Chapel Ridge Townhomes, and Legacy Apex submit. And those are all planned to go to Town Council in August. Those may get delayed or pushed ahead just depending on how long or short the reviews need to be, how good they are when they were submitted, or how much needs to be changed. We do have what looks like 2 definitely going in June. So the Williams property PUD, that's the one that was in the northwesternmost corner up on Green Level West. They're right next to Lake Castleberry, the original subdivision. And then we also have Kelly Woods going this month. That was the one on Kelly Road that had the stream that split it in 2. Those both have all of the conditions that were proposed and recommended, and we've got them going to council. The Apex C store, the one that was out on Old US 1 and New Hill, I think it's New Hill Holloman at that point, may be going this month. It may need 1 more month to kind of finesse things and make them work in a way that we can actually enforce. But,
and are you finding, Shelley, are there things that we should be writing into our conditions or discussing with developers to make staff's life easier?
Not really. Not so far anyway. If that becomes something that we identify as we move forward, then I'll definitely give you an update about that. Something that I'm going to be working on next week, because plan reviews are due this week and I have no time. But next week is to go through the projects that have been approved so far and figure out and pull together the common language from those. We're going to try to give a list of suggested zoning conditions, so ways that they can convert the recommendations into enforceable language to the applicants.
Wonderful.
And if there are a few that we don't have examples for, then we may draft a few that are just suggested language. They can always make changes if they want to, and we'll kind of go back and forth on the negotiation process. But that way it gives them a place to start.
This sounds wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone have any questions for Shelley? Great, I'll turn it back to you, Megan.
Thank you, Shelley. And I believe Kim is joining us now. So with that, we just a couple of announcements from our committees. So for the Tree Citizens Advisory Panel, they had their Arbor Day ceremony on Arbor Day on April 30th at Claremont Park, which went really well. It was the 6th year that we're a tree city, so they planted 6 trees. Council also approved the tree planting grant program last Tuesday at their council meeting, which is really exciting. It will give the community an opportunity to apply for a grant for planting trees. And that should include the cost of the trees, cost of having a contractor come out and plant the trees properly. Should be really exciting. I think that they are planning to launch that in a month or two. Bee City Committee, they just had their pollinator garden planting day on April 29th. Their last meeting was actually yesterday. They're starting to implement these educational time for like the end of the meeting, and they had a really interesting educational seminar yesterday about foodscaping. They're also planning on Pollinator Week events, which is June 21st through the 27th, and starting initial conversation around a sustainable neighborhoods program, which sounds really intriguing. So we'll definitely keep you up to date on that. Lots of exciting things.
Wonderful. Great. I, for one, am very excited to hear about the electric vehicle stations.
Sorry, I had to get off my mute and get my camera on. Hi. Shall I go ahead and get started? Yep, okay, great.
Thanks.
Go ahead and share my screen. Oh, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Jenna Schaus, a long-range planner with the town. I'm in the planning department, and I'd like to share with you all today some proposed amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance regarding electric vehicle parking. So I'll get my I'll share my screen if that's all right. Is it popping up on your end?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so here to present proposed amendments to the UDO regarding EV charging stations. So some background on the EV charging requirements. So back in 2018, Planning Department staff completed a comprehensive update to the parking standards in the UDO. And at that time, we looked into EV parking, but decided to hold off for the most part until more information was available about EVs and until we saw an increase in EV adoption. So then with this round of updates, we prepared a memo with EV charging information and with the proposed UDO requirements. And that memo is the memo that was shared with you all last week, and it's been reviewed by town staff as well as planning board. And planning board unanimously recommended approval of the proposed amendments in that memo. And it was also shared with development community stakeholders, and it will be shared with town council prior to the public hearing, which is anticipated for June 8th. And the reason why we're proposing to include the EV parking requirements in the UDO is because it's less expensive to install EV charging stations as part of new construction in comparison to retrofit. So some more background on these amendments is the proposed amendments are proposed in 3 sections of the UDO. First, the off-street parking and loading section, as well as community amenities, and then terms defined. And the current UDO requirement for EV parking is 2 spaces in each parking structure. And the goals of this round of updates regarding EV parking is to prepare for the increased use of EVs while avoiding unnecessary parking and to support the town's sustainability initiatives. And some EV and charging data. So the North Carolina Department of Transportation forecasts between about 250,000 and 350,000 electric vehicles in the state by 2030. And there have been some studies conducted on EV charging habits, and they found that most EV charging occurs at home, followed by work. And again, it's less expensive to install EV charging infrastructure as part of a new construction in comparison to retrofit. And then the next 2 bullets weren't included in your memo, but it's some information I found since then from a report that was prepared by Electricities and in partnership with Sagewell for the Apex Electric Utilities Department. And I found some interesting bullet points out of there that I thought you all may find interesting as well. That there's a 78% reduction in carbon emissions per electric vehicle, and on average, you save $804 in energy for EV owners. So you see the reduction in carbon emissions, and you save money with electric vehicles. And then there are 3 types of chargers: level 1, 2, and DC fast charging. And I'll get into here's a table that kind of has a brief overview of those 3 types of chargers. So level 1 is the most simple charger. You use the cable that typically comes with the car, and then you can plug it into a regular residential outlet. And 1 hour of charge will get you between 2 and 5 mile range. And the typical cost for this charging type is $300 to $1,500. And level 1 charging would not be required under the proposed UDO amendments. The next type is level 2, and this is by far the most common type of charging. So, and 1 hour of charge will get you between 10 and 20 miles of range in your EV. And the typical cost is around $3,500, but it does vary. And this type of charging or charger would be required under the proposed amendments. And finally, the DC fast charging is the fastest charger. So with the DC fast charging, you get 60 miles after just 20 minutes of charging. But there's really a wide range of costs for these units, but the typical cost is around $30,000. And the DC fast charging wouldn't be required under the proposed UDO amendments, but they would be optional in order to meet the minimum requirements. But the minimum would be level 2. And then getting into the specifics of the actual proposed requirements, if less than 11 motor vehicle spaces are required for that development, then there would be no EV requirement. And then if 11 to 49 parking spaces are required on the site, then an EV ready space will be required, but an EV charging space, no EV charging spaces will be required. And an EV ready space is one where all the underground electrical equipment has been installed, and you really just need to plug in the charger, but the actual charger or install the charger, the actual charger isn't required though for EV ready. With the EV charging space requirement, then you have to have all the electrical equipment to that parking space and the actual charging unit. So if 50 or more motor vehicle parking spaces are required, then that would kick in the EV charging space requirement. And I wanted to highlight a couple of notes or a couple of updates to the proposed amendments since the planning board meeting. And these were added after planning board's recommendation based on feedback that we received from the Apex development community stakeholders. So we've added an exemption for affordable multifamily and apartment developments, as well as a cap so that no more than 10 EV spaces could be required for a single development. And then for this, I'll go back. So for this table, all of these uses, the requirements in the table would only apply to the uses in this table. And back to those EV charging habit studies, they found that most of the charging occurs either at home or at work. So that's really what these uses focus on, looking at where people live, where they work, or where they spend a lot of time. So for most, the minimum requirement that we propose for most of these uses is 3%, with a few exceptions, and I'll call out those exceptions. First being commercial uses. We've increased the threshold from 50 to 100 spaces for commercial uses, so the EV charging spaces would only be required for larger commercial sites. The next exception is park, active or passive. We've reduced that to 2% to make it more manageable. And then for parking structures, for schools specifically, we're proposing to maintain the existing requirement of 2 spaces, as parking structures at schools are typically where students park, and they tend to operate under a parking permit system, so we don't want to interfere too much with that with EV charging. And then the final exception is the last one in the table. For high schools, it would be 1% of all spaces that are provided in the off-street surface lot, since these are typically very large lots at high schools. And then we've also proposed some accessible EV charging space requirements. So the EV charging spaces would need to be sized, but not marked exclusively as accessible in accordance with this table. So that means that the first charging space that you're required to provide needs to be designed as van accessible, but it's not limited to only those with that need. So it wouldn't be signed, it's still first come, first serve. So whoever has an EV could use it. But if there's the need for that person in there in an AV, then they would have a space that would accommodate them. And then the proposed amendments, the proposed amendment includes a number of charging space standards. And I'll just include a summary on this slide. So the EV charging spaces may count as a community amenity, and they shall be used to meet the minimum parking requirement. And there are some specific standards in there regarding the location, as well as the design and the proximity to plantings. And to note again that they need to be level 2 or DC fast charging to meet the requirement, and that they need to be posted with signage, and that the town doesn't regulate whether or not a private property owner collects a fee for usage of the EV charger. So it permits them to charge because state law allows that. And then here's a summary of the comments that we received from the development community stakeholders. So there was a comment in agreement with the foresight of expanding EV infrastructure, and a suggestion to incentivize rather than mandate EV charging installation, and to implement a maximum number of EV spaces or decrease the percentage of required spaces. And in response to this comment, we proposed that maximum of 10. There was also a comment in agreement with the 50 space threshold for one EV charging station, and some comments to consider methods to limit charging during peak demand, and then to consider potential equity concerns of providing EV charging, and then also to consider an exemption for affordable housing. And that kind of goes with the one above it. So, and we've also added that exemption in response to these comments. And then finally, there was one pretty detailed comment that we received, and it's outside of the scope of the UDO amendments, but I wanted to share it with this group in case you all are interested in kind of going beyond the UDO and looking at a town-wide, they referred to it as a broader expansion plan for EV outside of UDO requirements. So I'll just briefly go through the 5 phases that they proposed. The first one being to install EV charging infrastructure on town properties, which the town has done and is continuing to do. And then they propose to continue it into phase 2 to convert the town fleet to all EVs. In phase 3 for the town to subsidize employees to purchase EVs, and then continuing by expanding that subsidy to include residents of the town. And then the final phase to have incentives for new development to provide EV charging infrastructure on private property. So now I'd like to open it for questions, and I'll stop sharing so I can see you all, because now I can only see my screen. All right, and I'll wait in case you all want me to go back to a slide.
I was saying, if you don't mind, go back to that last slide, please.
That's yeah.
Jenna, this is John Garrison. I assume none of this applies to single-family homes at this point?
That's correct. We looked into requiring it in garages, like requiring at least the outlet or the 240 volt outlet for a level 2. But then I contacted our inspections, or the director of inspections, and the National Electric Code doesn't have that requirement, so we couldn't enforce it. But it's something that they're considering. So if the National Electric Code changes, then we could look into adding that requirement.
I guess this is for the staff. Would that be something that maybe we could encourage on rezoning requests?
To encourage having the outlets in garages?
Right. Yes.
That might be, but the only thing is, the enforcement is the only thing. I guess they could commit to it.
Right. Yeah. We
Have to
can't
figure out
force
what to
anybody to
do.
do anything.
Yeah, I don't know if they include it as a condition, there'd have to be a follow-up to figure out if it occurred. So that's something I need to ask inspections, because I don't know. It seemed like that may be tricky.
So we probably would need to have, this is Shelley, we probably would need to have building inspections do the inspecting for it, since it's not on their list of electrical requirements. It would be something that they would probably be less familiar with up front, but they would be able to inspect for it. Building inspections actually reviews a lot of our zoning conditions, especially the things that have to do with architecture and that kind of stuff. So it's definitely an option. I would recommend that you have an idea of kind of a ratio of how many homes you would want that to be seen in, similar to the way that we look at solar panels, just because otherwise asking somebody to put an EV charging station on every home is probably not going to fly. They're not particularly expensive. We looked at pricing them when we looked at some of the ones that you can just find online to buy when Jenna brought it up to some of the planners. But at the same time, every little bit adds up when you're talking about building a house, as I'm sure Patrick can let us know. But it's definitely something that you could suggest, and that there could be a zoning condition for it. It might also be something that you might want to look at, not just for single family, but possibly for townhomes as well, as apartments would fall within the UDO amendment that Jenna's already discussing. Right, Jenna?
That apartments, yes. Apartments would be
Okay.
required to do this, unless they were.
Would townhomes fall under that too, or is that not considered an apartment?
Single family and townhomes typically don't. Apartments,
Okay.
You can have apartments that look like townhomes, but we classify those as apartments because it's all one property and administered by one group.
Sure.
So,
That also falls on the commercial, correct?
right.
My
well,
question is related to John's, Jenna, which is if we're looking at a multifamily or apartment rezoning, is it helpful if we push for the condition? They're already going to have to do 3%, but if we push for them to do the DC fast charging, is that of significantly greater value?
It is a lot faster. Like, it's very efficient, and it's also much more expensive. So I think it's a trade-off. Maybe it might be context sensitive based on where the development is, what kind of apartment complex. So that's why we didn't want to, in the UDO, put a requirement too high to require 3% DC. But in some cases that may make sense. But at least right now, it is pretty expensive to get those DC chargers.
Okay.
Jenna, one more question on the cost. The cost that you showed in that table, is that retrofit or is that initial installation?
That's new construction. And then there were some side examples in that memo that looked at retrofit. I think one was a parking deck and one was in the town of Cary, they were doing one on their town campus that was a retrofit. I think there might have been 2 new construction, but the prices in here, those were, I want to be clear, those were just for the charging units,
Right, right.
not for all the underground.
Sure.
That really is so site specific.
Now, this is Patrick Adams again. Yeah, the only on that Michael Caleb numbers he had was the need and approximate cost. The everything seems in line except for the conduit for that. Just not unless it requires a different style of conduit than what typical electrical conduit would be. But again, that's that seems to be more of a retrofit cost if it's up to $50 per foot.
Yeah, that's what I received those numbers from a consultant, and they said that's when it really starts to spike with the retrofit, having to put the lines under asphalt all the way to the parking space, that it can go, I think it was like between $10 and $50, and it's on the much cheaper end if it's part of new construction.
I think that's part of John's question as well. Maybe
Yeah.
wrong, but okay.
Other questions for Jenna?
I do have one more question. Just out of curiosity, based off when doing your parking space allotment and count, where these EV stations are being counted for parking requirements, is that realistic, or is that like definitely got backup documentation or figure it out that actually does count for required parking spaces that are not EV?
I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're asking if it's realistic for the EV to count toward the minimum, like if there's still enough traditional parking?
Yes, no, that's correct.
Okay, I would say it is. One thing we heard from the planners, because I sent out an email, there's this NC plan list. I was asking people what other towns are doing for EVs. And one of the comments that stood out to me was to make sure that your EV requirement doesn't cause unnecessary pavement, that you don't have extra spaces on top of what's already required. So that's why we wanted to make sure that it contributes towards the minimum. And people can exceed the minimum parking requirement if they see that they need to, but there is a maximum depending on the size of the development. In some cases, the maximum is, I believe, 10% over the minimum. And in some cases, it's 25% depending on the size. So if there's a need to go over the minimum, they still can.
It's actually 15 and 25.
Is it 15? 15, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jen.
Anything under 100 spaces, you get an additional 25% for the maximum. Anything over 100 spaces, you only get an additional 15% before you bump up against the maximum.
Awesome, thank you.
And that's all still pertaining to everything but residential, is that correct? Single family?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Single family and townhomes, duplexes, et cetera, those kinds of things have separate parking requirements. It's typically 2 spaces in front of the home. We don't include garages because people never park in their garages. You end up having a two car sized shed that you access from a really big door on the front of your house. And then we have a guest parking requirement for townhomes because typically the driveways aren't long enough and they're spaced so closely together that you can't do on-street parking. So, but yeah, that excludes that. Yeah, and having the EV count towards the minimum is probably one of the best parts of this, just because we can get that extra box checked and we don't have to add any additional stuff other than the EV parts.
When would you anticipate this potentially going to the residential side? And more so like from the residential side of things, take amenity centers and account, which that would be a commercial permit. How does that look at?
Amenity centers have a certain parking ratio based on the number of units that are in the development. I don't know that we have ever had an amenity center get up to 50 parking spaces. maybe Buckhorn, and possibly the one for Sweetwater because of the large number of units for that. But generally speaking, amenity centers are underneath that 20 unit count. If a developer, a residential developer, wanted to offer to install 2 or 3 EV units, not spread out through the houses, but at the amenity center, that would probably be a good place for it. We have had a number of developers say that instead of putting solar panels on the houses, they'll put solar panels on the amenity center, and that way the cost of running the pool, the cost of the electricity for the depending on the type of amenity center you're looking at, it may just be, a couple bathrooms and a pool, but all of that can be run off of the solar panels. And then all the lights that end up being put out there for public safety, that can be run off of it. If you have a larger amenity center with a true clubhouse that can be used for gatherings and things, we've seen that happen as well. And we've also talked to a couple of people. It hasn't happened yet, but we have had conversations with people about doing covered parking spaces, kind of like a much better looking carport that have solar panels on top of it. And so this would actually complement very nicely with the EV concept. Some of our HOAs actually do have someone on site. If it's a bigger place with a bigger clubhouse, their management company may actually have somebody on site, so that would definitely benefit them.
Okay.
So that's an option. It's just not a requirement. And it might be definitely something for, especially as our council is a little more hesitant to approve a lot of single family or townhouses right now because of our school shortage. That might be something that our developers could kind of throw in as, I don't know, as a carrot, I guess.
Shelley, do you know, are developers, or does anybody know, are developers generally offering EV chargers as sort of an upgrade to single family homes, or sort of somebody could add kind of like a granite countertop or something like that?
I honestly don't know. That's not a side of things that I tend to get a lot of feedback from. Patrick, do you know if anybody?
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know if from a, not from a developer standpoint, from a home building standpoint, if from purchasing the selections, if that's an option to get that charging system installed, and without going back and checking what we have and some others have. I know right now, just due to the fact of the cost of building products right now alone, I know a lot of additional options have been backed off just because of availability.
Mm-hmm.
So I think earlier someone asked about, potentially making that a requirement, but again, that's a big favor to ask right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got good relationships.
I can definitely check in to see if if it's something, and I feel sure we'll be down the line, just like tankless water heaters, versus your upright ones, as being an option for some of the homes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mike Rusher here. I'll weigh in. I think the charging equipment is kind of its own little market right now as electric vehicles gain popularity. I think the challenge with the fitting equipment in homes is, as I understand it, the level 1 is not much of an install at all, but it's the lowest trickle charge, if you call it that, with a pretty simple. There you go. A pretty simple piece that's installed. Level 2 is a little bit more tricky with electrical fitting upgrades at the home. And then, of course, the big one's the DC fast charging. But a lot of that is made available through contractors with whoever's selling the electrical vehicle. They'll hook you up like when you go to Lowe's and buy a dishwasher or some other piece of equipment, they'll hook you up with a contractor to do the install.
Another thing there too is I know some builders offer full home generators and as a as an option. So I mean, it may be again this it's a that price 30,000. It's just depend on it gets up there to where full home generator is not that cost, but again it's getting to that point.
That's getting to the point where it's close to the same cost as getting 400 kilowatt hours of solar panels installed on your house.
But again, like I said, that's also going to certain price points,
Right.
of homes as well.
Can I ask a question about the memo, Jenna? Do you have that available? The one version I'm looking at is dated 5/12. And maybe I'm just misreading it wrong and I can't just wrap my head around it because I'm not all that familiar. But on page 8 under standards, EV charging spaces, I'm trying to understand the difference between the first bullet point and the third bullet point.
Okay, let me pull that up. I want to make sure. You said page 8?
Yes, and the title is standards EV charging stations under that section.
The third. Oh, number 1, if less than 11, then no spaces are required. And then the third, yeah, so if the development, if less than 11 motor vehicle spaces are required as part of that development, then there would be no EV requirement. And then for the third bullet,
I think this might have come
oh
about
my gosh, it was a typo. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you caught that. It should say it should just be cut. It could say if more than 50 motor vehicle spaces are required, then the EV space requirement kicks in, but that's kind of implied. So I'm really glad you caught that. I'm going to cut it or revise it. I think it'd be better if I revise it. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no. I just was trying to figure out if it was me or like what I wasn't getting or okay. Thank you.
Because I think even when I was reading it, I thought it was right. And I was like, wait, something's wrong. Okay. I appreciate that. I apologize.
Hey guys, this is Brett here. I thought I'd chime in a little bit because I own a plug-in hybrid, so I kind of experienced this issue a little bit. When you're talking about like the homes and the higher plugs in the garages, I think it's worth noting that most folks don't commute more than probably 25 miles, one way, so 50 round trip. That's probably the max, or near the higher end in the triangle. And the one I have, I plug into a regular plug, and I can get, after 5 hours, I can get 30 miles. So if you are plugging overnight, they're not going to need the big plug, required. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about maybe is that the EV ready spots are a little bit future proof, where you can add things in easier. So you guys may want to think about, I'm not sure what the right answer is in all this, but like if it can easily something be added in later, something to think about as far as like doing stuff now and doing like fewer or doing the required charging now, but allowing for more charging to come in later in the future. We have that a little bit with the conduit for the solar. The way I think about that is if solar gets more common, or if the charging stations get more common, in this case, having the EV ready stuff would be nice. But you guys, the committee, I'm just observing. So just my 2 cents here.
Mr. Gain, I want to make sure I understand. So you're suggesting that the number of total or required EV spaces be decreased and have the EV ready instead, or EV
I'm
ready
think-
on top of?
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
think at the very least, I'm not sure, but if you're going to add, I guess if you guys are the group that's going to kind of be the opposing side to the developer, which I'm not sure necessarily that's the case for this committee, but if there's an addition of stuff, maybe the EV ready would be a cheaper but also more future proofing alternative.
I think that would definitely be the staff's recommendation as far as if we wanted to see it in residential homes.
Right.
Just because, like you said, that's the least expensive option, but it also saves you the most money moving forward. A large portion of the money involved in installing solar panels, for example, is cutting through your roof and running conduit in a place that's not already open and all that stuff. So the $50 or $100 worth of conduit to make sure that you've got that available is a far cheaper option. So
Yeah, that's what I was hoping we could do, and just require the 240 volt in the garages, and maybe when the electric code changes, then we can, just so not everybody's gonna have an EV, but I've read that it's just similar to having like the outlet that your dryer plugs into is similar to just the level 2 outlet. So it's not I wouldn't think it's a huge ask, but it just kind of prepares for the future.
And for those homes that do have a garage, I think most of those have circuit panels in the garage. So, I mean, you're not talking about a very long run for a 240 circuit. Just adding one circuit and terminating it in the garage, I wouldn't think that'd be that expensive.
I can speak from experience. We did an addition and we didn't have any space left, enough space in our existing panel. So sometimes you do run into that where you're going to need a whole second panel.
Your thoughts, Patrick?
Everything, like just what Suzanne just said, it's there are several other factors to consider in making that request. I think it's probably something we should, we can look at as far as costs associated with, what it involves in the box with additional breaker, the actual cost of running the cable for an outlet. That's not a whole lot of different costs, but it all starts adding up at the end. Like I said, I think it's definitely something worthwhile to come up with a cost associated with adding something like that to at least provide an outlet for the future.
And that's what I was kind of getting at as far as the upgrade thing. Maybe not providing the charger, but at least providing the plug to put it in. I mean,
and even if it's even if it's the services ran, if you put a blade plate on it, then you whatever vehicle you have, you can make the plug just like a dryer. Sometimes you have certain dryer plugs that are this way, sometimes they're different, without having to change the plug out for the buyer. Then the vehicle, then they just put their plug in as needed that fits what their vehicle's asking for or requiring.
Jenna and Shelly, is that something you can look into for us, that if we wanted to put that on the suggested zoning conditions list and have developers voluntarily agree to that, is it possible to make it enforceable?
Yeah, I'll ask our building inspections director. That's what I've been talking to about the garage requirement. I'll see if that's something that if the developer offers it, that's something that could be enforced or it could be included as part of the inspection.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
That would, just to clarify, that would potentially be installation of a 240 volt plug in the garage hooked up to its own circuit breaker, which would essentially be an upgrade to the level 1 option of 120 volt charge, which is currently possible through a regular plug with an extra piece of equipment. Is that right?
That was my understanding. Is that what everyone's thinking?
That's correct.
Okay.
Jenna, is it your hope that we will vote in favor of this memo?
Yeah, I
UDO
support that.
amendments, I should say.
Yes, the committee's, or excuse me, the board's support would be helpful. If you all support it, I can bring that, I can let town council know, or if you have any comments or, but yes, I'd like your feedback, and then I'll share your recommendation with council.
I would like to make a motion to vote in support of these UDO amendments.
Second.
Thank you, Marilee. Suzanne?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Kim?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Pranati?
Aye.
Great. Passed. You have our unanimous support for your UDO amendments.
Awesome, thank you all. I appreciate you all letting me present to you all.
Thank you.
I do have one more question, Gina, on the when it does get presented. I would like for it to be presented in the manner of when a certain date this potentially could come on. Not just if site plan's been submitted, if site plan hasn't been submitted. Those are the kind of the triggers, so at least from a development standpoint and home builder standpoint, at least it can be accounted for in the budget review.
Yes, I think that's very important. We've included that in the ordinance, that it would become effective for developments proposed after the date that the amendments are adopted. So if the site plan has already been submitted prior to potentially the June 8th date, then it wouldn't apply. But after that, then the amendments would become effective.
Okay. I know a lot of times there's specification changes and so forth that take place, and that's not always considered from inspections from home building and development. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that's what we were thinking too. We don't want to have site plans have to redesign or anything to accommodate this, just moving forward. Would probably work well. Well, that's all. I appreciate your time and thank you for the support.
Thank you.
Very, very reasonable request. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Megan, do we have an update from the Dark Sky Working Group?
That's right. So the Dark Sky Work Group, we met for the first time on May 14th. And the work group is composed of John, Kim, and Patrick, and Shelly is on board as well with me. And so I think, just as a reminder, the original intention of building this group from the last meeting was to, and based off of a conversation, to establish a proposed zoning condition for the suggested environmental zoning conditions list for acorn and dark sky lighting fixtures specifically. And so as the work group discussed this, they ambitiously dominoed off of this concept and want to include in the conditions list a fully shielded lighting fixtures. In addition, they are considering adding a section in the UDO under the 8.6 exterior lighting section to be clear on purpose and intent for dark sky lighting. And our next meeting is June 4th. We're bringing on a couple of other individuals, one from Apex Electric and another from Duke Electric, to fully discuss this potential UDO amendment and the suggested conditions to hear their concerns and comments. So that is the synopsis. But with that, I'll open it up to anybody from the work group who would like to add.
I do have an email into both Rodney and Larry for that, requesting some sort of their time just for open dialogue to talk about it.
Great.
And Larry being from Duke Progress and Rodney from Town of Apex Electric.
Thank you guys for your hard work on that. That's exciting.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And I missed one meeting and I get left out of a work group. Jeez. Appreciate y'all though, seriously.
Yeah, they really wanted to cover this in depth. So it wasn't just a one and done meeting where we'll be meeting it every 3 weeks until there's a final answer that we'll then present to the board.
Perfect. Great. Megan, do you want to take us into community education?
Let's do it. All right. So I have a few points here. First, I'll share my screen and show you the ideas that were sent to me from all of you for expansion onto that ideas list for community education and outreach from the board. It was also requested to have some sort of calendar of events that the town runs, just so that we could see what the board could potentially get involved in. And then I also expanded upon that. You'll see that soon. And then I figured it would be good to create a goal for Peak Fest and how many education initiatives and promotions that you all would like to provide in September. And then, Mike, this might be your chance because it was also suggested that we break into a few small teams or work groups to really plan out a few more of those education initiatives in depth and look into some resources. So, give me 1 second and I will share my screen.
You stepped into that, Mike.
Sure did.
That's not a break.
Can't joke around like that and then be upset when we try to nominate you for a group.
All right. Can everybody see this Word document?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, so first, I think it's important to identify one comment, which was to define what education initiatives really were. I think it's a good idea to think in depth about this because it could just be something that the board pushes on the website or through pamphlets or something, or it could be something that's a little more active where the board communicates and engages with the community to find out really what the community wants to learn about and what could be most useful according to the community, and then also to what the council and different initiatives that the town is doing. So I did just make you super dizzy and scroll down here. Come back to our duties and powers from the town code, and just highlighted here a few items that could inspire us as far as what those education and outreach initiatives could mean. And so here you can see that strengthening through protection, promotion, and nurturing our community in the natural world. Just some key words here to think about. Scrolling down, advocating for managing environmental resources in a way that reflects the community's values. So community values could be something to investigate. Acknowledging, reviewing, and mitigating effects of climate change by recommending incentives. And then so, of course, these recommendations could be to town council based off of community education and outreach and feedback. Maintaining and improving current environmental protections, which is wide-reaching. Could be many different things, and of course, coordinate with an education initiative. And then, of course, supporting town efforts again. And of course, the town code specifically mentions efficiency within town facilities, reducing waste, reducing the town's footprint, and reaching the town's goal of achieving 100% clean energy by 2050 for town operations. And then lastly, acting as a proactive vehicle for community feedback on environmental issues. So the point of this is, it's ultimately up to you how you define education initiatives, but just starting that thought process through what the town code specifies. Moving forward, one of the ideas that were presented was about community education, environmental initiatives, and service awards, and presenting awards potentially from the EAB by doing EAB endorsed work, which I think is an intriguing idea. We do have a question here about the stormwater and water conservation list. We are still looking into this. If any staff on here knows the answer, please feel free to chime in. This is about an existing education initiative on that list, so we'll be sure to get you all the answer to that question. Another new initiative potentially is having a map showing how Apex gets its water and where it goes, which I think could be a really great visual representation, especially considering our two watersheds. And then back to that active engagement idea. So being engaged in events, right, as we said, sending out mailings to residents, coordinating with HOAs, even having a social media. And then, as we discussed last time, working with local schools as well. So before I go on to that calendar of community events and give you a peek of that, do we have any questions or discussion items that you'd like to explore from this so far?
I'll jump in first. I really like the idea, obviously, of the community environmental initiatives and service awards. I wanted to bring that up because in a lot of these instances, like, we're not reinventing the wheel for things that we want to support or get done, and some of which is already being done in the community. And along that line, like, we don't know what we don't know, and we're also looking for additional ways to engage with the community on issues that are in our wheelhouse. So, you know, when I thought through a process here, it would really check boxes for us on community engagement by initiating a process for the board to reach out into the community, either for like nominations or highlights or giving kudos to neighborhoods, individuals, or businesses that are doing some of the things that are on the list of our recommendations that we have now. So if a, you know, community center or HOA clubhouse, you know, pops solar panels on and is making efforts and strives towards energy sustainability, I think there's a lot happening out there that we don't know about, and we could strengthen relationships within the community while selfishly highlighting the work that we're doing, obviously, but also encouraging it to be more widespread at the same time.
Excuse me for a minute. This is Marilee. I have to step away from the phone, so I'll be back. Thank you.
I think Mike's got a good idea here. If we can get, you know, the word out of things that are actually being done, I think it'll become more widespread. A good point. I guess my question is, how do we go about getting that information to us?
Well, I'll just throw in here that, you know, the town tried to create a program called the Environmental Stewardship Award. And so the program lifted off, but it didn't really get started yet. But we do have that vehicle to, you know, grant awards to those in the community, whether it be residents or businesses, neighborhoods who, you know, identify some sort of environmental stewardship. Val and I are also looking into this plastic-free award. We're working with some folks in Florida who have made it work, and so we're looking into programs, and we could certainly help be that vehicle for the board. However, you might consider having an EAB-specific award or recognition program as well. But just know that we are also working on something similar and happy to work alongside you.
So it sounds like perhaps you've covered the base that Mike is proposing. And if that's the case, maybe the best course of action is just for us to highlight these awards after you have recognized people and businesses.
Absolutely, right. I certainly want you all to have the opportunity to highlight those that are specifically important to you all, although I know that our goals definitely align. But we can keep you all posted, and once we get this program lifted off the ground, start to coordinate that and provide you all the information of the certain entities and organizations that have represented the stewardship, and even start on some voting system. We're in preliminary stages with it, so we're really open to your ideas and however you want to be involved.
Couldn't this be a fairly casual thing too, where maybe it's almost like yard of the month, where someone nominates you, there's just a running list, there's no voting or major award process. It's just, hey, you're doing something great, we're going to put a sign up that says, you're the EAB group or whatever, of the month, and highlight a little bit about what it is, and maybe just do it that way instead of being a very formal thing.
And Megan, I'm also wondering, or the board, I'm also wondering, maybe you guys could recommend projects or people to the town council's environmental stewardship award thing. So you guys could be the kind of, about things going on, and could be the kind of the ground level to let us know about these things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to get at, is just, we're continually looking for ways to engage into the community. I think this is a really good opportunity if we figure it out on how to do it. For outreach, I know we're kind of limited to our little webpage that we have, and we're looking at other ways for outreach. But we just participated in Think Apex Day. It was outstanding. But that's a pretty massive outreach. I know there's a lot of contacts built into that information submission that happened there for additional outreach. And I'd sign up for whatever we need to do to help that process along, whether it's helping the stewardship awards or increasing the board's visibility to collect some of those projects and ideas that are happening already. So. I'll keep going. Megan, could you tell us a little bit about the process of the stewardship awards, and if there's any openings for us to be involved in that, to assist, not necessarily direct, but to help?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the intention of the Environmental Stewardship Award was to be more of that official award process, right? And award businesses and residents and organizations in the town a special recognition when they've done something for environmental stewardship. And so I don't think anything's really been identified as far as a specific process. I'll just go ahead and highlight that, there's several things going on here. So for example, with the Plastic Free Award, if you were to do X, Y, and Z, then you could get recognition as a plastic-free business, and then you would get a sticker in your window, right? And so that's one program where you get that sticker, you get that button on your website, and to be recognized. The Environmental Stewardship Award, I think, is intended to be more of an official process and to be granted an award, I think, annually. But I'm not sure that was ever really determined. So I think that based off of, that flexible intention, we can make it what we want it to be. However, there could be a separate EAB award where, like Kim was saying, it's this more casual, steak in the yard or in front of the restaurant or whatever it may be, to identify a business or a neighborhood for doing something that is EAB approved. So once we start establishing what this environmental stewardship award could look like, and our other programs such as the plastic free program, we'll certainly keep you all in the loop, and however you want to be involved, we're certainly open to that.
I think that sounds great. So we'll come back to that in a future meeting.
Sure. And if, I think it would be efficient to figure out what that's going to look like first, but you could also come up with an EAB specific program, an award system. So, don't let this process stop you from exploring other options. Are we ready for the calendar of events? All right. Let's see. And after that, I have some resources to share with you. Okay, so on the left here, and I'll just zoom in so you can really see, these are community events that were identified from the town. These are things that are celebrated. Of course, there are things that are not specifically environmentally related, which to me, I think we can always incorporate environments into anything. Sustainability is a well-rounded subject. So, there's always a time and a place, but that is something that I can send to you. Absolutely. So you can really read through it. And then on top of that, I went through and down here, the noteworthy annual events. These are specifically more environmentally related events that are happening nationally and internationally and sometimes statewide. From Seed Swap Day to Polar Bear Day, there are many different events happening that could be coordinated with the EAB, and I know the sustainability program is certainly looking into this as well. And so you can see many of these are organized by the UN. Everything else in parentheses are who organizes those events. So I will send this to you as well, but this is just a running list of the many, many great environmental programs that our nation and world are recognizing each year. And then I'll just note that everything in orange here are things that the town already recognizes or plans to start recognizing and getting involved with, such as Pollinator Week, as you can see there. But yes, the list goes on. There's just an endless amount of opportunities here, I think, for the board to get involved with. So any questions or months that you'd like me to scroll to?
All I'll say, Megan, is just throw me somewhere.
Okay.
It's Marilee. Yeah, just throw me somewhere.
Can we go back to where the town actually has scheduled things already to that first?
Sure.
Yeah. So one thing we'll talk about, right, is we are planning something for Peak Fest, which this year is in September.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So then perhaps we want to think about if we want to do something in the summer or in the fall going into winter. I would think that
Is there an option to do something on like the trick or treat on Salem? Kind of a similar thing where, we set the tent back up again and have that as a trick or treat spot as well.
that's what I was going to suggest too, right? There's like We give out some candy, but we also give out some literature.
I was going to say, I think it'd be mostly tricks for the kids.
Candy and literature together. But for most of the kids who go to trick or treat on Salem, they are accompanied by a parent.
Yeah. What about National Parks and Recreation Month?
I don't know enough about how the town handles the months.
I don't either.
Right? Would we maybe put something, Megan, on our website related to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the Parks and Recreation Month is usually pretty well attended, and Parks and Rec will have events at certain parks and different promotions. So, once we establish what those events are, we could certainly coordinate with them and see if there could be an EAB presence at one of those events.
Just out of curiosity, what was what was last year's attendance, give or take, on the next night out? I think that was before COVID.
Yeah, it would have been 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, my impression is that those are usually pretty well attended. It's on Salem Street, and encourages people to get out in the restaurants, and the businesses will open up later, and there'll be live music, and people tend to flood the Salem streets. And I've been to one or two, and that's my impression, but I've never worked one, and haven't seen the specific logistics. So, but I can certainly find out that information.
Perhaps it's
I
helpful.
was just curious as to the population that shows up, and I think we'll probably be able to also get a kind of decent look at it as far as what comes up with Peak Fest as far as the attendance.
Right. I think perhaps it's helpful to look at what kind of literature or giveaway we would like to do at Peak Fest. And then depending on what we decide there and how complex or simple it is, then perhaps we take some or all of that and try to do the same at one or two other events.
Hey Megan, what's your budget on swag for these events?
Well, we can't guarantee anything just yet, but I will tell you that we put into the budget for the EAB. So we're crossing our fingers there, and we'll hopefully get some swag. We will definitely have a nice booth and tent space for you, though.
Don't want to get shown up by stormwater again.
That's right. They're hard to beat.
They had some pretty cool stuff.
I don't know. They're pretty tough, and they get very into it. So
you might have to build a diorama to really compete with them.
Not even kidding. Honestly, they had it's either James or Anthony builds these model plastic things that show you how stormwater works. And you basically pour water in one side, and you can put other stuff in it, and then you can see it come out the other side.
Yeah,
So,
James does. He's got that program that he does, educational classes, where he's got those models built where you see it go through the mountains, the Piedmont, the coastal plains, down to the ocean, how erosion affects everything.
So maybe we do need to get Patrick to build us a diorama.
That's really cool.
Maybe we could just absorb them into us. I mean, it's environmental.
We'll just say we're in on it too.
Something about lighting. We could easily do a display showing color temperature and talking about the benefits of not using bright white.
That's a great idea.
We might even be able to get one of the lighting companies around town to, or even electric, to let us borrow some of their fixtures to show people what we're talking about when it comes to full cutoff type stuff.
If we can't get it from there, I have some friends that owe me some favors.
I forgot about that.
I'll say I have a good friend that owns a lighting company. He's in Greenville, South Carolina, but he does a lot of upfits and renovations here locally that he can maybe provide some stuff as well. I think he just got through. Doing Bateman Civil Surveying's office for Stephen.
And I'll throw out there too. So one thing we'll have to make sure we get on the calendar, there is International Dark Sky Week. We missed it. It was the beginning of April, but obviously it'll happen yearly. So we want to make sure we get that one on there. And then the International Dark Sky group has tons of free stuff that we can download and print at tab handouts. There's one that might actually be super useful that just talks about how lighting is an energy waster and how you can make changes to save energy for yourself.
Megan, do you want to take us through some of the different ideas that people put forth?
Sure. Well, the ideas that I received are up here. So those are the first things that we reviewed, but so not much that's super specific. But as far as resources go, I did receive this list of resources, including the display from Sunoco of what is accepted and what's not accepted as recyclables. And again, that Sunoco recycling flyer. More about Waste Wizard and what can be recycled. This one in particular is an interactive tool, so that's something that could be added to the board's website if we created a subpage for education initiatives that could take you to that interactive tool. We have that welcome video from Southwick Landfill that they did last year that was shared with you. And then more from Southwick, we have a Dark Sky Association Losing the Dark video. So it definitely sounds like we want a dark sky specific initiative. So that would be a great resource, as well as the advocacy resource. Some short videos there. Everybody likes videos. So again, another thing for the web page potentially. And then there were these outreach brochures that could be used and presented, and that could definitely be something that, and Kim, that might have been what you were referring to, or could be in addition to what you were referring to, and handed out at Peak Fest and at other events. And then outside of that, we have our running list that was sent to you, the community education initiatives list. So that hasn't been changed. And that includes the other ideas. And I'd be happy to pull that up as well if you'd like to look at that again.
Do the members of the Dark Sky Working Group feel like you could pick one or two of these ideas here and build on it for Peak Fest?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the idea of showing the color temperatures. I think that sounds great. I think having some sort of handout sounds great. A video, I think it's probably better on the webpage than at Peak Fest, because I feel like Peak Fest is loud and also bright because it's outdoors. So watching a video could be tricky, but not impossible.
We do have a tablet that we could lend to you if you would like to do that. I mean, you could even have a sort of like dark room that's set up to watch the video, and also, I guess could be some sort of, interactive display of, if you go into the dark and then you come and you have a bright light, then it could affect your eyes. And I mean, we don't want people to be walking around and bumping into things after watching the video, but it could be a 2-for-1 there potentially.
I feel comfortable, like,
We
if we
might need
decide.
another tent for that.
Yeah, but perhaps we would like dark sky to be one of the things that we focus on for Peak Fest. And I feel like there are some good resources here. So it's just a matter of deciding how we want to use the resources, but they exist already. And then perhaps we can, from the list of ideas, we can pick 1 or 2 other items that we'd like to promote.
Depending on what tree cap and the pollinator group decide to do, I've been sending, and I just remembered to do this, so I'm sending them to Megan right now. But I have a bunch of publications that NC State and some other fantastic groups have put together about native plants.
Wonderful.
Some of them include descriptions of why they're important for, the bugs, the caterpillars, the birds, all that stuff, and why we should actually care about the bugs and the caterpillars and how that kind of makes its way up the food chain. So, and I, at the very least, those are able to be printed, and some of them are, and given out. I think I do have some copies still of the Audubon Society's Piedmont plants recommendation, plants for birds. So I keep forgetting to look for that when I'm in the office. I will do that next week. But they are always happy. A lot of these groups are always happy to mail you things as handouts and interesting stuff. And some of the pictures are very cool to look at.
I think that sounds great. And I know we had just sort of joked around about maybe having a giveaway, and then the things that came to my mind, at least, which were trees and pollinator plants, seemed like they might already be covered by other committees. So if people want to give some thought to what might be a good giveaway to promote EAB, also to promote environmental stewardship, perhaps if we do succeed in getting our budget, then that might be a good way to utilize part of it.
So just as a thought, I came across something the other day and I can't find the link for it, but there are some places that will print little pamphlets or cards with information on them, but they're printed on paper that has seeds in them, so that instead of throwing it away, you can read it and then plant, like you actually dig a hole, put the paper in the ground and water it, and then you get plants out of it. So while the pollinator and other thing may also be covered by the tree cap and everything, it might also be a neat little thing that kind of combines stormwater and other things as well, especially if we got, say, some plants that really enjoy the wet spots that people have in their backyards.
I think that could be very cool.
And if nothing else, it's a waste-free option for people.
That's a good idea, Shelley.
A girlfriend of mine actually printed her wedding invitations on that, and I was very impressed and kind of jealous. Not that I'm planning on getting married anytime soon, but I was like, that's awesome.
I love that idea. I personally don't think that, I think you talking about native plants and trees and shrubs and stuff, you can't talk about that enough, so even if we do overlap a little bit with the others, I think the more people hear it, I think that's a good thing.
Hey, hey, Jessica, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here, Patrick.
Hey, just out of curiosity, going back to the pollinator planting, is and not knowing exactly the species throughout, but on the stormwater ponds, is that something possible to changing out the required plantings to be more of that style of plant material? I know your aquatic material may be a little different, but what's outside the aquatic shelf, maybe.
Yeah, potentially, because the MDC, the state kind of regulates. They have a huge list, and I'm not a expert by any means on these plantings, but potentially something on that list could be a pollinator. But whatever is planted or called for by the engineer has to be on that list in order to meet state requirements, town requirements, and everything. So, but like you're saying, outside of the aquatic shelf, potentially, there might be an option there, and like some of those might actually be pollinators. Like I said, I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff that the state requires actually is native plants. There's a few on there that are kind of native to the southeast, but not necessarily North Carolina. And there's a couple that are just generally good plants, but aren't really native to anywhere. But before we took most of the SCM stuff out of the RCA, planning actually had the fun job of evaluating those pond plantings.
Like one by one, yeah.
Every one of them. So most of those actually, there's several in there that have really pretty flowers and that are used as pollinator plants that way. But a lot of them are actually also host plants for caterpillars and stuff. But yeah, the outside of that, I thought most of that has to be turf grass now.
It does. You're right.
Yeah, I was talking more along the, like I said, just outside the aquatic shelf. That's where it's not, doesn't have to have submerged water material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that, I guess, because Shelley is right. I mean, we prefer to see the sod. It's just easier to maintain. Definitely no woody vegetation.
That upper level is what I was referring to. But then, the rest is sod up to the berm, and back of berm. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a potential because that area is going to be heavily planted anyway, and on any subdivision or development project if they're doing a pond or wetland or biocell.
Okay.
I like the biocells. They give us more options for that woody vegetation, the shrubs and the trees and stuff than we have with the ponds.
That's right, because it's not holding back a pool of water. Yep.
Right. You're not worried about the.
That's what they have there at the corner of the public shopping center, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Beside Glory Days.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That one's very well planted. I was looking at that the other day when I was getting a milkshake.
I was actually looking at the day eating lunch, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you plant, this is an aside. Oh, this is an aside. The stormwater pond that's on town campus that's sort of near the front along, can you plant stormwater ponds like that anymore? Or is that sort of legacy?
Not according to the state anymore. That most of the slope has to be sod so that they can make sure that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but I actually listen when we're in TRZ, so that they can make sure that things like the muskrats and the other little digging creatures haven't put holes in the dams and stuff.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's sort of a grandfathered one, or just, and it was also like a showpiece of what they could look like, back before some new rules back to the state. But
it did a great job of attracting the beavers in the area.
There's a ton of wildlife. Even if you go there like at night, like it is loud with amphibians. So yeah, I was just wondering because it is lovely. It's truly lovely as far as habitat goes, as well as being a stormwater pond, functioning infrastructure.
We had a pretty cool little floating island.
Big time.
Yeah, we had a pretty cool little floating island that had a family of ducks that lived on it every year, raised their babies in the middle of it.
So it sounds like we'll have a dark sky component. We possibly from Shelley will have some literature on pollinators. Does that feel sufficient? Does anyone want to propose anything additional?
I think we need something on the recycling and stuff. And I think we can get one of those pamphlets.
So the handout that Megan had on her screen, I think would be very simple for
Right.
us to print. And
Yeah.
possibly we can even add the link to the wizard at the bottom of the page, maybe.
Mhm. Yeah.
Theoretically, on the other side of the page, maybe we could put composting information.
Yeah.
It might be good to have some examples of like things that people think they can recycle that they shouldn't recycle to help kind of give a visual.
Yeah, I actually think this handout does do a good job of that. I have the handout on my fridge as a reminder.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of misconception as to what people think they can recycle and should not recycle. A lot of people recycle stuff that it just gets thrown in because it makes sense, but when it gets to the where it is recycled, it's not accepted. So, and maybe not, maybe like I said, add this to the website or the site. But as far as Peak Fest goes, maybe just have a informational board, that could be looked at versus another piece of a handout that, hey, that's cool to grab and look at. Then who knows where it goes.
I actually like the idea of the handout because that I don't know when I got it, but somebody gave it to me and I put it on the fridge. So I guess for me, I feel like the handout worked.
Yeah.
I think we've got there's a fine line between giving stuff out that's useful and giving stuff out that's going to end up on the ground
Sure.
at the end of Peak Fest. But I think this might be useful for folks. And I mean, you give stick it on your fridge. I mean, when you hand it out to them, keep it out front so so you see it when you start recycling.
Hand it out with a magnet. Hang it up with a magnet that has EAB or something like that on it, or something with the town.
Yeah, that's a thought. I was gonna ask that also.
Too bad we can't print the whole thing as a magnet.
Right.
That would be expensive, but
yeah, it would.
That would be.
But it's a thought. Maybe we do some kind of magnet to go with our literature.
Could we do like one of those clips that has a magnet on the back, and then that way we could kind of clip any handout that we give people together so they're not just tossing one or accidentally dropping one?
Great idea.
Should we maybe have some things that people that are sort of like, I like the idea of maybe having visuals of sort of things that you think you can recycle, but you can't. And one thing that strikes me here are like, because it's that time of year, like the strawberry containers, like the plastic ones. I don't think that those are actually recyclable, but they're not on here either in the accepted or unaccepted areas.
Most of them aren't, but some do have that pretty number 1 on them, which is basically the universal, it's okay to recycle. So if you do find a 1, it's generally okay, but if not, then it's not recyclable. Another thing that I've seen in like earth fairs and such that tend to be really great and interactive are having 3 bins and getting kids involved and having items that they can grab onto, like a plastic bag or a banana peel or whatever it may be, and they have to guess where it goes, whether it's in the landfill, the recycle bin, or the compost bin. Just a thought to get some more engagement.
As far as Peak Fest goes, I can get my landscaper to provide us with either 1, 3, or 5 gallons of plant material just to maybe put on the corners of the tent. But some pollinator plants.
I think that sounds great. Does that feel like progress? Can we revisit this at the next meeting? I feel like we pushed ahead and maybe we all need to think a little bit.
Agreed.
And I can certainly send you all a summary and some of these documents that I've shown on display tonight. And as a reminder, I think the final list so far is dark sky, pollinators, and recycling for the big topics for Peak Fest.
All right. Well, I was going to ask, because since I couldn't see what you were putting up, Megan, this is Marilee, if you would email, the list and everything. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
That sounds great. Does anyone have an item for open discussion? We've kind of been having open discussion, so.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion made.
Thanks,
Second.
Marilee.
Second.
And John will second. I will vote aye. Suzanne?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Kim?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Pranathy?
Aye.
Great. Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Yeah, thanks, staff.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.